So this video is just to remind you of the fact that there really are only 9 questions in trigonometry that you can possibly be asked. So you can know the opposite side and want to know the adjacent or hypotenuse, assuming you know an angle somewhere. You can know the adjacent and an angle and want to know the opposite or hypotenuse. You can know the hypotenuse and want the adjacent or opposite. Or you could need to know the angle and the information you have is 2 of the other sides, which could be opposite and hypotenuse, adjacent and hypotenuse, or opposite and adjacent. So it's just a question of recognizing which one of those 9 types it is. Every question is just one of those 9 types with the numbers changed. So you know the opposite and you want the adjacent first of all. Okay, so you identify that as tan. If it involves the opposite and the adjacent, then it's tan. You can look on your formula sheet in the exam and see that tan is the one that involves opposite and adjacent. So then you put in everything you know. So you put in tan of the angle, which in this case is 40 degrees, equals the opposite over the adjacent. So in relation to the 40, that's 5 over x that we're trying to find out. Okay, when the unknown thing is at the bottom of the fraction, those are the trickier ones because that gives you an extra stage of working. So to get rid of the fraction, you need to multiply both sides by x. So you get x times tan 40 equals 5, and then divide by the tan 40 to get the x on its own. X equals 5 divided by tan 40, and you can work out the value of that with the Desmos calculator in the exam. Next one, you know the opposite and you want the hypotenuse. So the thing that involves opposite and hypotenuse is sine. Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Put in all the numbers we know. So sine of the angle, 38, equals the opposite, which is 8 in this case, divided by x. So again, we've got the problem of the x being at the bottom. So we've got an extra stage of working. Multiply both sides by x to get rid of the fraction. So you get x sine 38 equals 8, and then divide by the sine 38 to get x on its own. X equals 8 divided by sine 38, which you can work out on your calculator. Moving on, if we know the adjacent and we want the opposite, so we identify that as tan if it's opposite and adjacent. Tan equals opposite over adjacent. Put in everything we know. So tan 41 equals x over 17. So that's slightly easier because you just need to multiply both sides by 17 to get 17 times tan 41 equals x, and then you can just work out what that is on your calculator. We know the adjacent and we want the hypotenuse, so we identify that as being cos. Cos equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Remember, these formulas are available to you in the IB exam. Sticking in everything we know, cos 35 equals 17 over x. So the unknown thing is at the bottom, so we've got an extra step of working to get rid of that. We multiply by x to say x cos 35 equals 17. And then divide everything by the cos bit to get the x on its own. X equals 17 over cos 35, which you can work out on your calculator. Okay, so the next two, if we know the adjacent, the hypotenuse and we want the adjacent, so hypotenuse and adjacent, we identify that as cos. Cos equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Sticking in everything we know, cos 43 equals x over 55. Then we've just got to multiply both sides by 55 to get a whole x equals 55 times cos 43, which we can work out on the calculator. Next one, we know the hypotenuse and we want the opposite. So hypotenuse and opposite, we identify that as sine. Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. Sticking in everything we know, sine of 44 equals x over 18. Then we've just got to multiply both sides by 18 to get x equal to 18 times sine 44, which you can work out on the calculator. So those are the 6 types where you're figuring out a missing side. And then there's 3 types where you need the angle and you've got 2 of the sides. So let's say you need the angle, but you've got the hypotenuse, for example 8, and the opposite, for example 5. So opposite and hypotenuse, that's sine. Sine equals opposite over hypotenuse. So sine of the angle, whatever it is 5/8. So the angle itself is the inverse sine, or arc sine, or you see sine with a little -1 on the calculator, of 5/8. And that's something you can just bang into the calculator and it will tell you what it is. Next one, if you know the adjacent and hypotenuse, that's cos. So you just start with cos of the angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Stick in the adjacent and hypotenuse that you know. So cos of the angle equals 15/17. So the angle itself is the inverse cos, or arc cos, or cos with a little -1 on the calculator, of 15/17. And you can just bang that into the calculator. Okay, so the last one of the 9, if you know the opposite and the adjacent and you want the angle, so then you use tan. Tan equals opposite over adjacent. So putting in everything we know, tan of the angle equals 6/12 in this case. So the angle itself is the inverse tan, or arc tan, or tan with a little -1, of 6/12. And once again, you can just bang that into the calculator and it will tell you how many degrees that is. Make sure your calculator, of course, is in degree mode.